Fred Richani of TSC. We have right here on the line a very special guest, a frequent guest. He is a renowned baseball historian. He is also the author of the hit book, the critically acclaimed book, The New York Yankees All-Time All-Stars, available wherever books are sold. On now is author James Griffin. Jim, thank you so much for your time. How's everything going?
Everything is good. Thank you, Fred. Good to see you. Good to be on again. And yeah, just a couple things going on in the baseball world. So happy to talk about it.
The Baseball Hall of Fame class was announced, and wow, I mean, we've got some big ones, including a couple of former Yankees. Of course, we got Ichiro Suzuki, CC Sabathia, Billy Wagner, Dave Parker, excuse me, and of course, one of my personal favorite historical figures, the late, great Dick Allen. So I'm not sure where you want to start from here, but this is a heck of a class. Do you think anybody got snubbed this year?
No real snubs. I think anybody who got snubbed will eventually get in sooner than later. So we can talk about those in a minute. But let's start at the top with kind of the king of this class, in Ichiro Suzuki. The late, great Ricky Henderson, I bring him, he calls to mind because Bill James once said of Ricky Henderson that he's so good that if you cut him in two, he's two Hall of Famers. And you could say the same thing about Ichiro Suzuki. I mean, you take his career in Japan. I think he played 7 or 8 years in Japan, 3-time MVP, All-Star every year. He was absolutely a Hall of Famer in Japan. Then he comes over to the U.S. as a pioneer. There had never been a Japanese everyday player in Major League Baseball before him. And he came right in. His first year, he wins Rookie of the Year, MVP, Gold Glove, All-Star, you name it, he won it. And he was a game changer in Major League Baseball. He was right in the middle of the steroid era, and he kind of made the case that you don't have to be a slugger to be a superstar in Major League Baseball, which that was the case a long time ago, but it was kind of disintegrating with all the sluggers that were coming into the fold. So the fact that he was that kind of player when he came in, he was great for 10 years, 10 straight All-Star appearances, 10 straight Gold Gloves, MVP consideration every year for those first 10 years. Just on that merit alone, he's a Hall of Famer in Major League Baseball. But then he played for another 7, 8 years, well into his 40s, which is commendable. He wasn't the same player that he was prior, but he stuck around enough to accumulate 3,000 hits in Major League Baseball, which is impressive because he only started when he was 27 or 28 years old in the U.S. So yeah, Ichiro is absolutely deserving of the Hall of Fame. He probably should have been voted in unanimously, but we got one of these guys who decides not to vote for him. Same thing happened with Derek Jeter a few years back. I don't understand the reasoning there, but you know what? We're not going to sweat it. I don't think Ichiro's sweating it. He was a pretty cool guy. He won over a lot of fans with his kind of cool, calm demeanor. Said a lot of funny, low-key things. I'm sure he's fine with it. But yeah, congrats to Ichiro. He's more than worthy of this honor. And then the other guys on the ballot. So CC Sabathia, I'd love to talk about him for a little bit as a Yankee, because he came into New York, with the Yankees. They were coming off one of the rare seasons where they didn't make the playoffs. So back when George Steinbrenner was running things, and they would spend like drunken sailors to mitigate that. And CC was the big catch that year. He signed a record contract as a starting pitcher. The Yankees absolutely needed him, but it was very clear that the expectation was that the Yankees win the World Series. Anything less than that was not going to be acceptable. And sure enough, CC did just that. I mean, he pitched well over 200 innings. He was a workhorse. He anchored a 3-man rotation in the playoffs between him, Pettitte, and A.J. Burnett. And they ran through everybody in the playoffs, including the Phillies in the World Series, where he put his money where his mouth was, and he won the World Series for the Yankees, and he was one of the biggest reasons for that. And then it wasn't just a fluke with CC, because he was great for another 3 or 4 years. While the Yankees didn't make it back to the World Series in those couple of years after, it was no fault of Sabathia. He was a great pitcher. He was consistent. He was a workhorse. And then he had a bit of a lull in his career. He struggled with injuries. He struggled with alcoholism, which was unfortunate. But to his credit, he overcame all those demons. He got himself healthy again. And in his late 30s, he turned into a pitcher. He wasn't just a guy who could throw hard and overpower hitters. He could really pitch at the end of his career, where he could paint the corners. He could induce weak contact from hitters. And he was very effective at the end of his career, and was a big reason that the Yankees got back to the ALCS a couple times just before he retired. And he literally pitched until he couldn't anymore. His last game in October of 2019, he felt a pop in his shoulder. He tried to keep going, but he couldn't, and he said, "I'm done." And at that, he had already done quite a bit, more than 250 wins. He won the World Series. He made the Yankees back into a championship caliber team, and that's a Hall of Famer in my book. And it's good to see him get in on the first ballot. And the last guy who got voted in by the writers, Billy Wagner. So former Met. So there's a New York tie-in with Billy Wagner. And I could see it took him a full 10 years to get in, and I could see the case for why some folks wouldn't want to vote for Billy Wagner. He pitched less than 1,000 innings in Major League Baseball, which no Hall of Famer has pitched less than 1,000 innings. But when you think of the modern game, guys who come in and they throw 100 miles an hour, every team has 3 or 4 of these guys. Well, Billy Wagner was doing that before it was cool. Let's say he was a little guy. He was like 5'10". He could throw 104 miles an hour, 105 miles an hour, whatever it was, and he was lights out. In his less than 1,000 innings, he was remarkably effective, like one of the most effective pitchers you could see all time when it comes to the amount of hits and walks he gave up per inning. So I think, he was kind of a precursor to what we see on the regular now. Billy Wagner kind of blazed that trail. So I'm happy to see him get in too. I don't think he's a slam dunk Hall of Famer, but the fact that he's in is good, I think, because he's a remarkable talent when it comes to pitchers, and kind of fits in the modern day too.
The classic baseball era, a committee like these, I mean, those are some pretty big names, and one I think is extremely long overdue.
Yeah, I mean, Dick Allen, it would have been really nice if they voted him in when he was still alive, and unfortunately, baseball tends to do this sometimes, where guys who might be on the borderline, but certainly have a good case for the Hall of Fame, they kind of tease them, and they'll be on these Veterans Committee ballots for years and years, and then once they unfortunately pass away, then they vote them in, which is, I wish that wasn't the case. But Dick Allen was a great player. I mean, playing in Philadelphia for a while, amazing hitter, a true talent, and you could say over a good course of years, probably 5 to 7 years, Dick Allen was among the best hitters in baseball. So those are the kind of guys that you like to see celebrated. And, I wish we would see more guys like that get in, when they have a chance to see it. And thankfully, Dave Parker is one of those too, who wasn't the guy who had a super long career, or he wasn't super effective over a long period of time, had his own struggles with injuries and drugs and all those things. But again, he's a guy like CC who overcame all that and was a good, effective player towards the end of his career. But early on, I mean, he was an MVP candidate every year in the late 70s and early 80s. So great to see Dave Parker, the Cobra, get in. And I think it's a great Hall of Fame class. 5 guys, that's a good number. Each one of them are worthy. Each one of them should be celebrated, and we'll see that this summer.
You actually didn't feel that there were any real strong snubs. There were a lot of people online, though, on baseball Twitter that are like, hey, what about Andruw Jones?
Andruw Jones, as you mentioned, and Carlos Beltran. He's a guy who, absolutely worthy of the Hall of Fame. Andruw Jones, certainly worthy too, but I could see a case against him. He was never an all-time great hitter. He was a good hitter, but he wasn't a great hitter. And I know a lot of folks don't necessarily believe the advanced fielding metrics when it comes to Andruw Jones, but Beltran, there's no doubt about it. He's a Hall of Famer. I know why he's getting snubbed, but he'll probably get in by next year. But he was a part of the 2017 Astros and that whole scandal, which, as a Yankee fan, sure, I didn't like the fact that that happened, but Beltran as a talent, he was almost an impossible mix. There's no gaps in his game. He could run, he could hit, he could field, he could hit for power. He could do everything that you would want a baseball player to do, and then some. And he was involved in that Astro scandal, but he probably took the heat because he was the oldest guy in the team. And he probably knows a thing or two about sign stealing because it's been happening since the 1800s. But he'll get in next year. So I'm glad that it's not a snub to the point that he won't get in. And Andruw Jones, he's got 2 years of eligibility left. I imagine he'll get in before it's all said and done too, which I'm all for. I think he's a Hall-worthy guy. He he won more than 10 or more Gold Gloves as a center fielder. One of the hardest positions on the field. Came in as an 18-year-old. I saw him in the World Series play against the Yankees, and he almost ruined the World Series for the Yankees, but thankfully that didn't come to fruition. But Jones was a very good player. Again, he was a guy who, at the end of his career, was not terribly effective, but a great player nonetheless when he was in his heyday. And then the other group of snubs, which is very clear why. So A-Rod, Manny Ramirez, and I'll even put Andy Pettitte in there. But let's start with A-Rod and Manny Ramirez. So they're very clearly steroid guys, failed tests while, there was rules in place finally in baseball, which it took them way too long to do. But they're guys who, based on merit alone, if you just look at their career, and Manny Ramirez, I mean, I could confidently say he's one of the 5 greatest hitters I've ever seen. I've seen a lot in my 40 plus years, but obviously the steroid thing holds them back, and they're stuck in this limbo of they're about 35, around 35% of the share of the vote. That'll increase a bit, just like we saw with Bonds and Clemens. They'll probably get up to the 60 range, but they're never going to get voted in by the writers, which is unfortunate. We've gone through this a bunch, Fred, but I feel like the Hall of Fame is a place for the greatest players who ever lived, even if they had some demons. There's plenty of baseball players in the Hall of Fame who did many terrible things. So I think A-Rod and Manny, they wouldn't be the worst guys character-wise in the Hall of Fame. So I say put them in. We'll see if down the road veterans committees decide to finally push them over the edge and get them in. I think it would be a good thing. Many people don't. Just like everything else in America, we'll argue about it until the end of time. But then I'll also throw Andy Pettitte in there. Andy Pettitte is a little bit of a different story because his failed drug tests were before there was any rules in place with baseball. And he's also a unique case because he came clean. He admitted to what he did. He apologized, which was unlike any other players of the day. It ruined his friendship with Roger Clemens for taking that stance. But yeah, I think Andy Pettitte is worthy of the Hall too. When you think of October baseball, I think of Andy Pettitte. I mean, all those great Yankee teams, he was the guy they went to when they needed a big win, and he came through more often than not. On top of that, he had a good long career, more than 200 wins. He wasn't a guy who racked up strikeouts, but he's a guy who, when he was in a pinch, he got out of it. He was somebody that sticks in your brain as like game on the line. You want Andy Pettitte on the mound, and that being the case, especially in October, I think he's Hall of Fame worthy. He's actually tracking a little bit less than the other steroid guys, probably because he doesn't have the magic numbers like the strikeouts and the 300 wins. So there's probably other reasons why writers aren't voting for him. But I would consider all those guys Hall worthy. And maybe someday when it comes to veterans committees, could be 20 years from now, maybe we'll see them get in. And it'll be a happy day for me when that happens. So.
Where's the morality test? You know what I mean? Like, I think a guy like, sorry to bring up his name, but like Kurt Schilling is like a way worse person than like anybody you just named there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's an argument that's not going to go away for sure. I was relieved when Bonds and Clemens were off the ballot because we didn't have to have this argument anymore. But it's not. I mean, it's not going to go away. And I think eventually, cooler heads will prevail because it's hard to think of baseball in let's say the 90s and the 2000s, but even back to the 80s or even after that, it's hard to think of baseball without these prominent figures like Roger Clemens and Barry Bonds, like some of the most talented players you've ever seen. And yeah, did they enhance their talent a bit? Sure. But I mean, Barry Bonds, even before he did steroids, was one of the best baseball players that ever existed. And it kind of turned him into superhuman, which, I mean, it's unfortunate that he resorted to that, but it doesn't take away the fact that he was, his God-given talent was off the charts, and he showed that every day when he played. So, nobody's going to forget that. It's not like not having him in the Hall of Fame makes us like, oh, who's Barry Bonds? I don't even know who he is. Like, we all know who he is, and we're all going to talk about him still. So just put him in there, and it can make the conversation a little bit better for younger kids who want to learn about baseball. And we can tell them all the bad stuff too.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there. Now, in terms of looking into the future, 2026 and beyond, is there anybody on the horizon that you feel like is a slam dunk, and anybody that maybe is going to need a little bit of support from the media?
When we look at the turnover, there's, as far as guys returning next year, there's really nobody on the ballot who's going to turn over and be a slam dunk in the coming years, and I think rightfully so. I mean, outside of Beltran and Jones, that's probably the two that are we'll see in Cooperstown sooner than later. But it's funny with Sabathia. So, and it's not like it's going to be too soon that pitchers like Justin Verlander or Max Scherzer come on the ballot. But Sabathia is one of the last of a dying breed when it comes to pitchers who were workhorses that could pitch 200 innings every year, that could throw complete games, that could do all this stuff. And I think what's going to be coming is a shift in how we think about the Baseball Hall of Fame. Outside of Verlander and Scherzer, who I think will be in the Hall of Fame because they have kind of that workhorse mentality and they racked up wins, and Verlander could even get close to 300 wins. But after them, after those two, I think it's going to be a very long time before we see any pitchers make it into the Hall of Fame, especially starting pitchers. We might see some relievers get in, but without those magic numbers, like even just 200 wins, even 3,000 strikeouts, numbers like that, we're just not going to see it anymore. And we might have a lull period here when it comes to the writers and how they vote. And it might take them some time to adjust, which is fine. Things change in baseball all the time. But I think we can get ready for a bit of a dry period when it comes to the writers with upcoming candidates. So.
Very interesting. Yeah, that's so true. And you got to judge everybody by their era, right? I mean, you compare them to the past and everything else, but at the end of the day, if they're the best of their era, and maybe they're not, there's not as many workhorses, they should still get some consideration.
Absolutely. And writers can be a bit reluctant to come around to that, but sometimes they do eventually. Billy Wagner got in his 10th year, even though he had less than 1,000 innings. So we might be 10 plus years away before we see some of these pitchers who don't rack up 200 innings every year get voted into the Hall of Fame. We'll see. It'll be fun.
It'll be fun. And what's also been fun has been the off season. Maybe not so much for Yankees fans, because obviously the Yankees lost the World Series, and they also lost the superstar Juan Soto to the New York Mets of all teams. And I never thought I'd see the day where any team, let alone the Mets, is outspending the Yankees. I figured they'd match them, outspend them. Kind of crazy to think about. What's your been assessment so far of the Yankees' offseason moves or lack thereof, and of course the Mets getting Juan Soto?
Yeah, I mean, it's been fun for some people this offseason, especially Mets fans and maybe Dodgers fans too. They're making moves because that's what they do. But yeah, so the Juan Soto deal, it's a seismic shift in baseball, not just in New York, but I think in baseball when it comes to the way we think about free agents and the way free agents kind of behave. Because when you think about it, the Juan Soto, he walked away from the Yankees over, not that it was over $5 million, but there was only a $5 million gap between the Mets' gargantuan offer and the Yankees' gargantuan offer. So we're talking about less than a fraction of a percent that Juan Soto went to the Mets over the Yankees, which means to me, it was about the money for sure. Juan Soto wasn't going to go to a team that offered him $500 million. He was going to go to one of these huge bids. But when you get down to the details of it, what I really think Juan Soto wanted was to be the superstar of a team, the core of a team, the guy on a team. That wasn't going to happen in New York. He had a great season here with the Yankees, but Aaron Judge outshined him by quite a bit. Soto had the best season of his career, but so did Judge. Judge had the best season of his career, and I think that may have factored into Soto's decision to go to the Mets and be the man and kind of be the guy responsible to push that team over the edge. So, kudos to the Yankees for going way out of their comfort zone. I'm not going to feel bad for them because their comfort zone should actually be way higher than what they offered to Juan Soto, and you see the revenue that they're worth and what they should really be able to spend. But at the same time, they went out of their perceived comfort zone, so kudos to them. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's Juan Soto's choice, and he's one of the best players of a generation for sure. And I really think he's going to put that Mets team over the edge. So I'd been taking a look at some of the moves that both the Yankees and Mets have made, and when I speak of a seismic shift with Soto, I can kind of explain why. So if we look at the players that the Yankees lost, so when you look at guys like Anthony Rizzo, Gleyber Torres, Alex Verdugo, those guys are kind of addition by subtraction. Rizzo is not the player he once was. Verdugo has never been a great player, but he certainly was consistent with that with the Yankees this past year. And Gleyber Torres, who had some good seasons with the Yankees, but I think it's clear that he's no more than really an average player at this point, so that letting him go was not a big deal. They also said goodbye to Nestor Cortez, Clay Holmes, who went to the Mets, part of the Mets making moves. But So that's 5 guys, and you add the 6 and Juan Soto. By my calculations, or if you look at the advanced metrics and the stuff that kind of feeds WAR calculations and that, the Yankees lost between 40 and 45 runs of worth of production, and almost all of that is Juan Soto. So, they lost all that production. What they gained is they signed Paul Goldschmidt, Cody Bellinger, um, guys who are not as good as they once were for sure, but they're probably better than guys they're replacing, and like Anthony Rizzo, Alex Verdugo. They traded for Devin Williams, which was, I think, a good, solid trade. Certainly doesn't alone make up for the loss of Juan Soto. They made a big signing in Max Fried. They gave him a pretty big contract. He also helps kind of mitigate the loss. But when you add all that up and you factor in Jason Dominguez as a young kid who's going to come in and play more regularly, a full season of Jazz Chisholm, that's what they got to replace this gargantuan loss of Juan Soto. When you add all that up, even if you be generous to, let's say, Dominguez and Jazz Chisholm, they're probably no more than gaining 15 to 20 runs when it comes to all that. So when you add it all up together, the gains and losses, they're about 20 runs down, or at least 2 wins from where they were previously. So losing Juan Soto, I know a lot of folks who said, you know what, if Juan Soto's gone, good, he can go be with the Mets. The Yankees are making moves. They made the trade for Williams. They signed Fried. They signed Goldschmidt. They got Bellinger. They're going to be fine. And I don't share the optimism there. Let's put it that way. I think that they'll make the playoffs for sure. They're not a bad team, but let's not take it lightly that they lost one of the best players in baseball, who effectively, they ran the 2-man offense with Juan Soto and Aaron Judge, and they worked it to perfection. They were a great team this past year because they had both those guys. Since they don't have both those guys now, it's going to be a struggle. They might win 90 games. They'll make it to the playoffs, but I think they might run into some resistance when they get into October. On the flip side, if you look at the Mets, obviously they gained Juan Soto. They also signed Clay Holmes. They signed Griffin Canning, Frankie Montas to shore up their pitching staff. They traded for Jose Siri, which is a pretty good addition. And they also acquired A.J. Minter, a good pitcher from the Braves. What they lost was Luis Severino. They're probably going to lose Pete Alonso. Jose Quintana, we'll see where he goes. Same deal with Harrison Bader, Jose Iglesias. So they may still re-sign Jose Iglesias, but if you do the similar kind of analysis with the Juan Soto move, the Mets are probably gaining 25 to 30 runs. And almost all of that can be explained by Juan Soto, even if you factor in the loss of Pete Alonso. So I think absolutely the Yankees' loss is the Mets' gain. I think neither team, or the Yankees didn't do enough to make up for that loss. The Mets didn't need to do much more than just simply sign Juan Soto. And I think you're going to see the Mets be a front runner in the NL next year. The Yankees will be in the mix, but if they had held on to Soto, we'd definitely be talking about the Yankees being World Series contenders for sure. It would probably be between the Yankees and Dodgers again, but we'll see how it shakes out. Juan Soto could break his leg tomorrow, and that might not be good, but we'll see how it shakes out.
So what is your kind of bold prediction for the Yankees, where they end up, the Mets, where they end up, and overall, who do you see coming out of the AL and the NL?
Yeah, so as I said, the Yankees will be a playoff team, I think, for sure. Even with the loss of Soto, they did enough to stay relevant. However, I don't see them getting back to the World Series. They're going to run into somebody, whether it's whoever comes out of the AL Central. It's a crapshoot every year, but those teams tend to get hot, and they could get hot in the playoffs. And same deal with the West. I mean, with the way baseball works in the playoffs these days, all you need is a hot team in October, and it's good for teams like the Dodgers and the Yankees last year to kind of stack their team to be a little bit heat-proof in October. But unfortunately, that won't be the Yankees this year. So I get the feeling they're going to run into somebody hot this October and probably not make it back to the World Series. As far as who it might be, I don't know. It could be, the Red Sox could get relevant again. The Rays always seem to sneak up on people. But whoever's playing the best as we get into the late fall, that's what's going to happen. And then in the NL, it's really tough to bet against the Dodgers. Like I've been touting the Mets here, and I think the Mets will have a much easier time come October. But I think it'll be tough for them to get past the Dodgers in the NLCS. So um, whoever gets out in the AL versus the Dodgers, that's what I'm calling it. And the Dodgers will probably repeat. They're making moves, even more so than the Mets. So it's I think it's going to be LA again come October.
Hey, well, I'm sure a lot of Dodgers fans will like to hear that, but yeah, I can't blame you. I mean, they're another team that is spending a ton of money and making all the right moves coming off the World Series. Certainly not getting comfortable to say the least. But is there one besides like who's going to win the World Series? Who's coming to AL? Is there one bold baseball prediction? Could be a rule change, could be some type of free agency move. What's your one bold baseball prediction for 2025?
Well, I'm not going to make any bold overall baseball predictions. I think we've had some recent rule changes that have been pretty effective. People wrung their hands about pitch clocks and stuff when that first came up, and people with the expanded bases as an incentive to steal more bases and all that. So I think when it comes to rule changes, I'm not expecting anything huge, at least not this year. But things could be coming down the road. We'll see. But I'll keep it small. I'll keep it in my shop, in the Yankee shop, and I'll just talk about two prospects that they have that I think are really under the radar right now. Like nobody's really talking about them, but I think could be in for a big year, and one of them could even make an impact on the big league team this year. So a guy named Chase Hampton, he was drafted by the Yankees in 2022. Out of college, he was out of Texas Tech. He's a righty. He can throw for 4 different pitches for strikes. He's a guy who can be a starter or reliever, but they probably rely on him to be a starter. He missed most of last year with an elbow injury, but he avoided Tommy John surgery, which is really good. And he's only 23 years old. And I imagine he'll probably start the year at Double-A this year and quickly make it up to Triple-A. And, baseball being baseball, the Yankee starting rotation is going to need help. When does the season start? April 2nd. They'll probably need starting rotation help on April 3rd. I could see Chase Hampton plugging in and being one of these rookies who comes in and impresses, kind of like Luis Gil this past year, who kind of came out of nowhere to be a really effective pitcher for the Yankees. I could see that happening with Chase Hampton. And then another prospect they have in Roderick Arias, who's a shortstop, a Dominican kid who signed as an international free agent. They gave him big money for an international free agent. It was $4 million. That's a lot more than those guys typically get. He played in Single-A last year. He struggled quite a bit, but he was only 19 years old. But there's a reason the Yankees gave him that big money to come over to their organization. I think he'll have a chance to put all the skills together, even at 19 or 20 years old, going into this season. He can make some noise as a shortstop in Single-A. Obviously, the Yankees have a shortstop right now in Anthony Volpe that they want to continue to roll with, but they have a glaring hole at third base. So if this 20-year-old kid proves that he can maybe play third base, maybe he's the answer for the Yankees this year in the long term. So those are my predictions. We're going to see maybe something happen with Chase Hampton and Roderick Arias this year with the Yankees.
Awesome. Well, great insight as always, Jim. I really appreciate the time. Before I let you go, where can fans find you online? Where can they find your book? And where can we find you next?
Yeah, so you can I have a blog. It's called Jimmy Says. It's you can flash the URL on the screen. But I typically have a whole bunch of recent activity about the Hall of Fame. I touched on all the Yankees that were on this year's ballot, and even those that were on the Veterans Committee ballot. So I always have pretty comprehensive coverage when it comes to the Hall of Fame. And I just check in periodically with more posts. I'll do some content on the Yankees minor league rankings. You'll see Chase Hampton and Roderick Arias on there, I'm sure. So yeah, I like to keep up with what's going on with the Yankees, but also take a deep dive back into historical stuff. Look at historical games, do some reviews, do some player comparisons, all that good stuff. So you can find me on Jimmy Says. And I have links on that blog to Facebook and Twitter. We call it X now, whatever we call that thing now. But I have links to all that stuff, and you can find the book on Amazon and anywhere books are sold, as you said.